My name again is Trevor Harrison. I'm director of Parkland Institute. I want to thank all of you for coming to what has been a fabulous conference. I'm saying to a few people, and I hope you would all agree, I've had any number of people come up to me just saying this really is the best they've ever seen. And that includes every other conference anybody else does in the country, right? So. Before we proceed with our final speaker of this conference, just a few thank yous that are necessary to be done at this point. Thank yous to our conference sponsors, the Alberta Federation of Labour, Athabasca University, Canadian Union of Public Employees, Civic Service Union Local 52, the Health Sciences Association of Alberta, Non-Academic Staff Association U of A, the United Nurses of Alberta, University of Alberta's Faculty of Arts, and the Wordsworth Irvine Socialist Fellowship Endowment. So a round of applause to all our fabulous people. Of course, we also are always really happy that media pick up and are able to disseminate everything that has come out of this wonderful conference. So a number of media sponsors are also thanked for their generous support. Alberta Views Magazine. For sure. CJSR Radio Edmonton. And very sadly, View Magazine, View Weekly, but thanks so much for your support over the years to View Weekly as well. Big thanks to a few small businesses that have also really helped us out here. First to Earth's General Store for their freshly roasted, freshly ground fair trade coffee. We have to change that. That is a mouthful. Every year I've had to say that. I think, oh, God, that's a lot of words. And other fair trade products that we served over the weekend. To Bonton Bakery for the fabulous pastries and the Upper Crust for catering our lunch yesterday. Thank you. And most importantly, thanks to the many volunteers that you've seen doing a fabulous job around here throughout the weekend, who've made this conference so successful. We had over 30 volunteers this year, just as a point of interest, who helped make this conference happen. This includes all the session facilitators and the other folks who have been around the conference making everything work. Parkland cannot thank you enough. Going down the list here again, and certainly not last by any means, special thanks to Mark Coppin and his team. Mark, where is Mark here? For ensuring that we get both audio and video recordings of the conference for our website, to Rob Butts for all his effort in keeping our conference website operational and online, and to Flavia Rojas for all the conference design work. Again, these people have worked with us a long time. Great job as usual. I know, as in the past, there's probably a number of people I have not named here. I want to thank all those people and ask all the volunteers, if they're actually in the room at this moment, to please stand up. Please, any volunteers who are here, round of applause. Now, one of the largest thank yous, as always, I have to give is to needs go out to our incredibly able and dedicated staff for all of their hard work in making sure the conference happens smoothly. Gail Davey, our Programming and Development Coordinator, who helped organize so much here. Scott Harris, our Communications Coordinator, who has coordinated our website presence and communications. Charlene Oliver, our Administrative Coordinator, for keeping track of all the registrations, tickets, etc. And because he always leaves his name off, Ricardo Acuna for his usual fabulous job. I just want to remind you here that please remember Parkland receives no corporate, foundation, or government funding. Events like this one are only possible because of the generous donations we receive from individuals like you and the organizations you belong to. If you haven't filled out a pledge form yet, please do so and drop it off at the Parkland table, and feel free to take extras to pass along to your friends. Another reminder, and I'm going to have to remember this, please drop off your name tags every year I go home and forget to do that. So please don't do like me. One last reminder to please take a few minutes at the end of this conference to please fill out the conference evaluations. We go over those in the next few weeks here to see how we've done, see how we can do things even better in future. So please do that. It's very helpful to us. So finally, we come to our last speaker of this weekend, Andrew Nikiforuk. Andrew is an award-winning author and journalist who's been writing about oil and gas industry for nearly 20 years. Through his work, he has shown a deep commitment to accuracy, government accountability, and cumulative impacts. Andrew has published several books, including most recently Slick Water, Fracking, and One Insider's Stand Against the World's Most Powerful Industry, and The Energy of Slaves, Oil and the New Servitude. He currently reports on energy and the environment for the Tyee, and is, I have to say very proudly, a longtime friend of Parkland Institute. Please join with me in welcoming Andrew Nikiforuk.
Thank you, David. Well, it's been quite a conference. I've enjoyed it tremendously, and I think many of the speakers are spot on about some of the challenges facing this unique bipolar province. And I want to first of all thank Trevor and Gail for getting me here and for the invitation to close this conference. And I also want to thank the Parkland Institute for just doing what it does. You know, that Amira Haas, the great Israeli journalist, has said that good journalism is really all about monitoring the centers of power and the abuse of power. And a really good institute working in the public interest does the same thing. So I applaud the Parkland Institute for standing strong in this province. So I've got two jobs here this afternoon. One is to kind of sum things up and also to explore some themes in Alberta politics Albertans are not comfortable really talking about, such as the volatility of bitumen prices and pipelines and climate change and the growing liabilities on the landscape facing every taxpayer in this province. So we started with Lynn Fernandez, and we learned that income inequality, always a symptom of revolutionary times in history, is worsening across the globe, in this province, in Canada, in Europe, in the United States. And as the rich are getting richer, our politics are getting more polarized and volatile. We learned from Janet Brown that Albertans are still hurting and that there are 4 voting tribes in Alberta. Imagine that. There's the old-fashioned capitalists, the prairie populists, the cosmopolitan crowd, and the ivory tower idealists. I mean, she had them all kind of mapped out. I would be a prairie populist, I guess. But what she pointed out is that the NDP are largely drawing their support from only one tribe, whereas the Conservatives, the new Conservatives, whatever you want to call them, are drawing from 3 active tribes here in Alberta. Janet also mentioned that pollsters deal with perceptions and have no grasp on reality whatsoever, but I would say that Janet's presentation was very, very close to the political reality that is unfolding in this province. And then we had a bunch of economists. We had Angela McEwen from CUPE confirmed that Alberta does indeed have a volatile revenue problem, right? And then we had Mel McMillan adding to this statement by noting that the province has experienced a 17% drop in revenue. More importantly, it has failed to recognize that the collapse in oil and natural gas prices over the last decade really signify a structural shift in the energy market, and that the province has not responded to this. There is no plan to deal with this shift other than praying for another boom or lobbying for another pipeline. Ian Husky from Parkland Institute then provided some great comic relief by documenting how 5 oil sand producing companies were making a killing in this province. Emily Eaton from the University of Regina followed and added to Husky's laugh fest by documenting Saskatchewan's oil travesties, which are somewhat worse than Alberta's. And she argued that the fossil fuel industry has really become a taxpayer liability in North America, and that we need to talk more about these liabilities and how we're going to pay for them. Gwendolyn Blue, a geographer, warned about the perils of scientism. It was a very wise talk. While Ian Urquhart, a political scientist, showed that Alberta's so-called climate leadership remains a laughable smoke screen. And Emily Riddell reminded us that here on the banks of the North Saskatchewan River, Treaty 6 nations have always gathered to talk about the present and to talk about the future. And when the whites arrived, or when the settlers arrived, or when the intruders arrived, and the treaties were signed, there was much talk about these treaties, the breaking of treaties, and what happens when you invite somebody into your household and then they take over the house and force you out of the house. And here we are. We're gathered in the same place that the Dene, the Cree, used to gather, and we're also talking about the future once again, and we're also talking about the breaking of other treaties, the Paris Climate Treaty. And then we ended this morning with Fred Stenson, and Fred describes himself as a literary entrepreneur, or perhaps as a free enterprise writer, and he gave an imaginary PowerPoint about Bible Bill and King Ralph and the crazy bipolar nature of our politics, and what he has learned by going for breakfast at the A&W. All right. So just to recap, all right, we have income inequality on a huge scale contributing to an awful lot of populist and revolutionary sentiments around the globe. We have, are we not? We seem to, have we expired here?
We have a volunteer.
Oh, okay, excellent. The light doesn't seem to be on. There we go. Okay.
We got laser.
These magic wands, you always have to be careful. Mm-hmm. Can I just manually? Okay. So if this is, you're saying this is not working.
I'm going to get more. You tell jokes, I'm going to get more.
Okay. I think I'm out of, I'm told I will be tasered if I sort of walk beyond a little circle here and for filming purposes. So just to recap then, I mean, we've got this issue with income inequality growing rapidly. We've got climate change coming down at us at a furious rate, you would have thought that a $9 billion fire in Fort McMurray would have wakened more Albertans up. Unfortunately, it did not. Sure. All right. No? Okay. Okay, now try it. No? No? All right. Okay, so I have to point it at Gail. You don't have to stand there the whole time. All right. Okay, Gail, are you ready? All right, here we go. All right, I really dislike technology, and actually, Fred gave a marvelous presentation without a PowerPoint, and the only reason I'm using a PowerPoint is because I want to document a lot of things that I'm saying. We're going to go through them pretty quick, but I want you to see the documentation because as a journalist, I'm very concerned about evidence and the lack of evidence we see in political decision-making in this country. Okay, yeah. So there's another issue that's also unfolding here, which I think is really important and part of the bigger picture, and this has to do with the shrinking of the global economy at the same time that elites are trying to corral more and more wealth for themselves. And there's an economist by the name of Robert Gordon. Let's go on to the next. I love this manual system here. This is great. He's saying, like, there was virtually no economic growth before 1750, suggesting that the rapid progress made over the past 250 years could well be unique in human history. And we're in for a change and a shock here. Because if we want to address climate change, we have to slow down economic growth, period. There's no way to do it. Okay. The other issue, too, that is kind of the unspoken issue behind the conference is the fact that Albertans are very fearful about the future. New Democrats are fearful about Jason Kenney coming to power. Average Albertans are fearful about the volatility of oil pricing. There is fear on multiple levels all over the place. Okay. Now, I still think one of the most progressive thinkers in the province ever was this man. He is the only Canadian that actually came up with a program for dealing with resource wealth. And I'm going to just go through it in very simple terms because this is the opportunity that the New Democrats failed to grab when they suddenly came to power in 2015. All right? And so Lougheed put it this way. You've got to slow down, so don't develop anything fast. If you do, you're going to lose. Save the money, right? We know what happened there. Collect your fair share. Lougheed did that. No other premier has done that. Behave like an owner. These resources belong to Albertans, not to oil sands developers. And add value. The resource we're talking about here is cheap refinery feedstock. It has always been cheap refinery feedstock, even though energy ministers like Pat Nelson once called bitumen the jewel of hydrocarbons. You know, what kind of bullshit is that? You know, really. And it is cheap refinery feedstock and will always be the most volatile hydrocarbon out there in terms of pricing. So Lougheed put it, and his last commandment was clean up the mess. So slow down, save the money, collect your fair share, behave like an owner, add value, clean up the mess. That is considered today in this province a radical program. Right? Next. And look, compare it to what Farouk al-Qasim had to say. Farouk al-Qasim was an Iraqi petroleum engineer who married a Norwegian and who moved to Norway in the 1970s, immediately got hired when the Norwegians found oil. The Norwegians said, look, we know a lot about sardines and aluminum. We know nothing about oil. What can you teach us? And Farouk set up their regime, and his commandments were simple. Slow down and save the money. All right. So let's tell the story quickly of what has happened in this province, all right? So next, we've got this fabulous, huge resource of really badly degraded hydrocarbons in the tar sands. And then we start really hammering at this resource in the late 1990s, and we go to the United States and we say, look guys, you appear to be running out of oil. Oil production in the United States is going down. You need security of supply from us, and the oil sands is your solution. And oil sands will replace depletion and fuel economic growth. And then we had Murray Smith, as Fred Stenson was talking about this morning, about the model that's worked for, this is the Alberta model, 1% royalty. How can you improve on that? You can't. You're giving it away. Even Murray Smith said, this is a give it away program. Boom. Every multinational in the oil and gas business is soon buying stuff in the oil sands. Then we have King Ralph going down the States and saying, look, guys, we got energy to burn. And then he says, and then he adds, no, there's no planning involved, because planning would be an interventionist sort of thing, right? And if you're a market fundamentalist, as Ralph sort of imagined himself to be when he wasn't drinking too much, I guess, or maybe when he was drinking too much, and no planning. And we are really dealing with that legacy today. Okay. Boom. And oil sands production, after the regulator approves one project after another, after another, after another, never thinking about markets and prices, and the law of supply and demand keeps on going. All right. And then we're told Alberta's now got, home to the economic engine of Canada. A cheap refinery feedstock is somehow keeping the whole country afloat and employed and everything else. Meanwhile, we're doing this in Alberta, right? We're, the prices are going up, we're having a great time, and we're partying. We do not take notice of the impact that petroleum has on the whole system of taxation. You get those petrodollars in, those dollars from oil and gas, and then government wants to make you feel warm and fuzzy about all that, and they say, we're going to reduce your taxes, and we're going to run on this non-renewable finite resource revenue, and we're going to build our hospitals and our roads, and we're going to do this without even having any public discussion about it. And then you have, people in the oil sands industry saying, you guys wouldn't have any roads, you wouldn't have any schools, you would be, you'd be pantless out there if it weren't for the revenues from oil and gas, and on it goes. And then we have this culture of, go to Louisiana, go to Texas, go to Oklahoma, go to Alaska, go to the Middle East. They do not have sales tax. I don't know of a petro state in the world that has a sales tax, maybe with the exception of Norway. Because they've all bought into this diminishment of the whole bond between taxpayer and their government. So here's even Deloitte spelling out what happens when you get addicted to petroleum revenues. Running on petrodollars weakens the fiscal social contract between citizens and state leaders as the normally tax-paying public exerts less scrutiny of how tax revenues are raised and spent. That's Alberta, in just one picture. Okay. And then, of course, we've the emissions are rising, and the people in the oil sands are telling us, don't worry about that. That's the smell of money, right? It is the smell of money. And then, there's no thought at all about this being an abnormal political development. To be ruled by one party for 44 years. You have to go back to the Soviet Union to find that kind of record, right? And, well, there are certain petroleum states. Mexico was ruled by one party for 70 years, all on the basis of oil wealth. So this is, again, a characteristic of petro states. Terry Lynn Carl, great U.S. Political scientist, puts it this way: high levels of dependence on oil rents have always tended to reinforce the regime in power. Of course, that's not true if your resource rents are going down the drain. Okay. So we are becoming more and more wedded to oil prices and their volatility. Oil is the most volatile commodity on the planet. So here, as we begin to exploit more extreme and more difficult oil and gas resources with fracking, offshore, digging up the boreal forest, oil is becoming more volatile in price. Okay, we're running out of the easy stuff and we're hitting the hard stuff. Here's a more even recent graph showing the extreme volatility that really goes in 3-4 year cycles. This is enormous volatility. There's no way any government in the world can deal with this kind of volatility if they're using oil and gas as their key revenue stream. And then what happens if you're not taxing your people and you're depending on oil dollars? Then the big black line in this graph shows you all of the irregular revenue streams for Alberta, and all of the lines in the middle, those are all the other provinces like BC and Saskatchewan, where you have more or less a stabilized regular source of income because it's coming from taxpayers. It's not coming from renewable resources. And here's a simple summary. Volatile revenues usually leads to volatile government expenditures and the inefficient provision of government services. Amen. On we go. The Tories had a tremendous problem with this, right? They were posting deficit after deficit after deficit, just as Prentice was coming on board. And this volatility led to, let's go back one more, to increasing political volatility, right? You've got Alison Redford, she gets all these votes, and before you know it, she's gone, she's out of there. And then we have another behavior common to oil. We have another, pronounced bust, and then the NDP comes to power. Why did that happen? The NDP didn't expect to win. Did Albertans suddenly become New Democrats? No, they did not. But the collapse in oil prices exposed how incompetent the Tories had been with the money. Briefly, it was there for everyone to see. And what do we also know about periods of low oil prices? They are the only time you ever see change in a petro state. Just think of the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring was a product of falling oil prices. As soon as those prices begin to rise again, the opportunity for change and reform closes. So the NDP caught this rare opportunity in the province at the same time that the right was divided, and Albertans were uniformly disgusted at the incompetence, negligence, and outright corruption that 44 years of one-party rule had delivered in this province. All right, so bust and boom culture, that's Alberta. It's a lot of parts of Canada. We're doing this. The NDP have inherited a royal mess, and they're posting one deficit after another. And increasingly, Albertans are getting uncomfortable about that. They've played a little bit with the taxes, but not very much. And then if we look at other petro states in North America, Oklahoma, Texas, Wyoming, Louisiana, which remains, despite all of its oil wealth, the poorest state in the United States, their revenues have gone haywire too. And they're all scrambling. They're all running budget deficits. They're all having the same kind of conversations that Albertans are having about the future. They are fearful, they are concerned, and they don't know what the future is going to bring. Okay. And then we failed to notice this. We failed to notice it because Albertans have largely been asleep at the wheel. We failed to notice that as oil production rises in this province dramatically, largely from the oil sands, our revenue stream is becoming less and less. We are capturing less and less of the profits, fewer and fewer profits. This is our last kick at the can, guys. If we don't capture those profits now, we will not be in a position to make any kind of transition anywhere. Okay. So here's the last royalty review, which was done under the New Democrats, which changed hardly a thing and was an absolute farce and was run by bankers and financial people in this province who want to get their money back. They're not concerned about taxpayers. And they said, no, we're not going to change the royalty regime, even though oil sands producers were beginning to make record profits. And here, by not changing a competitive fiscal share, Alberta is in fact subsidizing the industry. Low royalties subsidize the industry. This gets government directly into the business of business and removes the benefits of market-based price signals, leading to reduced innovation, higher costs, reduced competitiveness, on it goes. Okay. Which puts us in this position where we have 5 major oil companies making record profits of around 19 to 20%, and the province is recording deficit after deficit after deficit. Okay? Meanwhile, here's another thing we sort of, at the beginning of the oil sands boom, nearly 15 years ago, the United States was running out of oil. With the fracking revolution, which is really, the use of extremely brutal force throughout rural America, the United States has temporarily reversed that and has increased production dramatically to the point they are now exporting oil. And they are among one of the world's top producers. You've got Russia, you've got Saudi Arabia, and you've got the United States. And we're a marginal player in all of that because most of our oil is, again, a cheap refinery feedstock. And then we get into some extreme politics. We're not going to buy your wine. But what? Really. Okay. So let's talk a bit about bitumen and what Albertans really don't know about this resource. And this is really important. And as I've emphasized, it is a cheap refinery feedstock. All of the original oil sands pioneers recognized that. All of the companies with upgraders said, oh, man, we got to upgrade this stuff. This is crappy, messy, nasty product, and we've got to add some value to it, even if we want to move it through a pipeline. Get rid of this water, get rid of some of the carbon, add some hydrogen, let's enrich it and turn it into something of value. The poor quality of the resource was recognized by all of the early researchers. Carl Clark, who's a brilliant guy, who figured out how to separate bitumen by using his wife's washing machine, right? She did not appreciate that, I can tell you. So he said from the beginning, you cannot run on this resource. This resource is not a rich resource. It is a poor resource. It is a second line of defense. You better have a plan for getting off this stuff ASAP. All right. Let's go on. So, how is industry perceived the resource? Well, they've been pretty honest about it. This is from a presentation in 2005 by Gerald Bruce, and let's go on to the next one. The differential has always been there. Bitumen is always sold for less. It's sold for less because it costs more to transport, it costs more to refine, and it's ugly, nasty stuff, right? Period. Now, the differential will always be there, but the differential can change, can grow dramatically if you've got a pipeline leak, if you've got a refinery shut down, or if oil prices start gyrating in a crazy way. So it's a very, very vulnerable and sensitive to price changes. Okay. So here's another example of this. This is from the Royalty Review in 2007. By the way, Ed Stelmach came very close to putting Alberta on a different path to actually getting better value for its resources. He got scared and he backed away because the industry pummeled him. So again, this is during the Royalty Review 2007. Again, they're showing the price difference. They said, look, we know about this price difference. What do they say? Bitumen prices are 63% more volatile than West Texas Intermediate. This is in 2007. The government knows about the volatility of the resource, all right? And it's typified by large price drops and recoveries. 2007. We're not talking about 2018 where this is finally front page news. Okay. And what else does this report say? Done by and for the government. Price volatility for bitumen is the most obvious risk. In other words, you rapidly exploit this resource. This is the risk you put yourself at. This, of course, is a revenue risk for the resource owner. Oh. Industry, in contrast, can do something. Industry can buy a refinery. Industry can make a deal with a refinery. Industry can secure long-term pipeline contracts. Industry can hedge. Industry can store the product. And that's what they do. And then there's this document. This is from 2008. Remember when we were going to have all this upgrading and value added in Edmonton? And, it was, Upgrader Alley, Refinery Row, and it was kind of madness. I mean, so many projects were proposed. They all died in 2008 with the financial crisis. And, but the government was depending on this. And here's what they had to say. They said, wider differentials between bitumen and Alberta light medium oil are due to short-term increases in the supply of bitumen without an increase in refinery capacity. Thank you very much. And they said, don't worry, because we've got all these upgraders coming on, and we will solve this problem. No, they didn't, okay? Meanwhile, the royalties for bitumen are among the lowest in the world, and here we have Pedro Van Meers, one of the top royalty people in this province and also in Canada, saying, your royalties are so low, they are encouraging rapid development and overproduction of this resource. Damn it, guys, if you would raise your royalties, you would encourage more value added, more upgrading and refining in this province. Why didn't they listen? Because this is all unfolded and we are all paying a price now for this. Okay. This resource is so volatile, one small leak, and sometimes these leaks aren't small, on the Embridge system will just change all of the pricing for bitumen, not for weeks, but for months. Okay? And then we've got more good news coming our way. All right, the International Marine Organization is changing fuel standards for shipping, marine shipping. Most of it runs on heavy oil. And they're saying the sulfur content is way too high and we've got to get to a lower sulfur content. And this is sending shockwaves through the whole global refining industry. That's how finely tuned it all is. And what do the experts say about what's going to happen to bitumen again? The price discount on Western Canadian Select crude with respect to West Texas Intermediate will expand significantly. All right, so more bad news coming down the pipe. All right. Do you know who these guys are? The Koch Brothers. The fabulous Koch Brothers. Charles Koch actually talks a bit like Preston Manning. He has that same kind of peculiar, folksy twang as he speaks. All right, what do these guys own? They own a refinery. Where do they own it? They own it in Michigan. What is the refinery called? Pine Bend. How long have they owned this refinery? 60 friggin' years, okay? How long have they been refining what they call garbage crude from Alberta? Well, for nearly 60 years. They handle about 320,000 barrels a day. When the discount exceeds $15, these guys are making windfall profits of $2 billion a year by selling jet fuel and gasoline at Brent prices. So the Koch brothers have figured out something the Alberta government could never figure out, how to make a ton of money from a garbage crude. And actually, they're not the only ones. Okay. And here's Charles Koch, we'll just go on, saying, without Pine Bend, Koch Industries would be a different company. We'd be a much smaller and less successful company. So even if they've only been producing or been running through their refinery, Alberta heavy oil for the last 20 or 30 years, and $2 billion a year, I mean, you're looking at 60 to 80 billion bucks these guys have made off of Alberta's resources. And how have they invested these resources? All right, these are the guys that funded the Tea Party movement in the United States. These are the guys that have helped to fund political dysfunction throughout the United States. And where do they get their money from? Us. There will be a day of reckoning about this when people recognize what actually has happened. All right. Meanwhile, a lot of economists in this province and elsewhere have always argued add value. That's where the money is. That's where the jobs are. And yes, there are issues and challenges from greenhouse gases associated with that. That's for damn sure. But if you're thinking about this province and jobs in this province, this is what you need to do, okay? We're not doing it. We're shipping more and more raw bitumen, adding no value, and paying $14 a barrel for condensate from the United States or from the fracked fields of northeastern BC to dilute it and move it through a pipeline. $14 a barrel. The going price for condensate at the moment is about $70 a barrel. It's more than oil. That's how valuable this resource is. Okay. Few words on pipelines. Let me just take a little fluid break here, if you don't. All right, so let's go on. If you're not going to refine it, if you're not going to upgrade it, what are you going to do? You're going to strip it and ship it. And that's why pipelines have become the political hot potato in the country. All right? So let's talk a little bit about Trans Mountain Pipeline, which you all know very much about and has been in the news for the last year and a half and has been the source of much bitter debate in this country. And really aggressive debate, and I would also say a ton of lies. And so here's the first big lie, which is on this slide, but let's go on that. Here it is, blown up. The Trans Mountain Expansion Project, which is now, as I think Emily Riddle called it, the Taxpayer Mountain Project now, because it's now owned by Canadian people, will reap $73 billion in revenues over a 20-year period by raising the price of oil in Western Canada. All right, that's the claim. All right, so who made that claim? Where does that come from? That's the figure that Rachel Notley touts out. It's a figure Justin Trudeau and his ministers use. Where the hell did this figure come from, okay? Well, it comes from one place, and it comes from only one place, and it comes from a report commissioned by Kinder Morgan during the project approval process. And it's done by a company in Texas called Muse Stansel. And here's the guy who did the report. He is a petroleum engineer. He is not even a friggin' economist. And he's making claims about this massive windfall that one pipeline will produce And it sounds miraculous, because it is friggin' miraculous. So what were some of the assumptions in his report that are completely false? Number one, no other pipelines will be built for 20 years. Well, line 3 is already under construction. All right, and that's close to 1 million barrels. All right. His next assumption is that oil will sell at $100 a barrel. Oh, yeah, good luck with that one. All right, where are we now? $60 a barrel and falling. Number 3, that somehow increased bitumen supply will result in higher prices in refineries in China. Okay? And then he goes on, and not only that, by increasing the supply of bitumen to Asian refineries, the price will keep on going up. Well, I said, what happens when you oversupply a market? The price goes down. Why would the Chinese want to pay more money for bitumen than refineries in the U.S. Gulf Coast? Believe me, they will not pay more money than refineries in the U.S. Gulf Coast. They will pay less. Then his other assumption is that the Canadian dollar is on par with the U.S. dollar, right? And then he says all heavy oil is subject to discount in North America. Not one of those is true. Not a single one. And this report was torn apart during the hearings by economists from Simon Fraser University, by Robin Allen, who is a phenomenal economist in BC, and the city of Vancouver. And they said, look, this report is bogus. This is not an economic argument for this pipeline. This is a made-up document to get approval for a project that is not in Canada's best economic interest. Okay. And, and here he is predicting, how oil prices are just pie-in-the-sky oil prices that are not going to happen. And then we got a bit of a reality check from the Royal Bank, who came out with the report in March. And they said, okay, this is how it pans out, guys. This is what we are producing at this point in time. So half of what we're doing is heavy oil, and a lot of that is raw bitumen. And then we have synthetic crude, and then we have a few other things. They're not subject to the discount. So it's only the blue part of this pie that's subject to the discount. But that is deceptive, because very little in that blue part of the pie is actually subject to the discount, and here's why. It goes on to say that that 2.25 million barrels a day of heavy oil, that's the blue pie. One producer's discount isn't the same as another. Why? Because many of them upgrade, many of them refine, many of them have long-term pipeline contracts, very few of them are selling oil in the spot market. So to assume that all heavy oil production in Alberta is subject to discount is wrong. And then we go on still, and here comes the propaganda. This is again from the Alberta government saying, we've got to get this project going, because without it, we aren't going to get this higher price. Well, what's the reality about heavy oil now? Next one, in China. Some heavy oil from Mexico, which is equivalent to the heavy oil we produce, sells in Asian markets. It sells for $8 less in Asian markets than what it sells for here. And if Maya crude from Mexico is selling for less, how the hell can a similar product from Alberta sell for more? It's not going to sell for more, right? So there is no price uplift going to happen in Asia, period. And then Rachel Notley will come and say to you, well, and she said this in Vancouver recently, let's go on. The reality is that now and will always be a pretty substantial market for bitumen in the Asia Pacific. Okay, let's go on. So what do the experts in Alberta say? This is a report done for Innovation, Alberta Innovates. And okay, and they look at China, they look at India, they look at Japan, a shrinking market in Japan. India is dominated, it's got coking capacity, but it gets its oil from the Middle East. And China hasn't got a lot of coking capacity. And what's their conclusion? The best market for Alberta's heavy oil is still the U.S. Gulf Coast, Pad 3. She's saying one thing, and what government experts are saying is that's not true. That's bullshit. Okay. And so really, this whole discount story is a tale of winners and losers, with the Alberta government being the primary loser and Alberta taxpayers and owners of the resource being the primary loser. So, Ian Husky did this good report on the 5 top oil sand producers, and we're going to run through some of them and what they're saying about the price discount. Okay, so just you get the picture. Suncor, massive #1 producer. They're making tons of money. Why? Because they upgrade and they refine. They're an integrated company. They sell cheap bitumen to themselves, and then they sell to the rest of us, highly priced, refined hydrocarbon products. Are they concerned about the price discount? Nope, because they're taking advantage of it, just like the Koch brothers, and they're making a killing. All right, next one. What about Husky, another integrated producer? Are they concerned? No. Tight integration increases their profits. Imperial, what do they say? They had record profits this year. Record profits. And so if you want to understand what's going on, you have to appreciate, again, the fact that this heavy oil discount doesn't affect all heavy oil producers. All right. So here's something that we really failed to observe. What happened to oil prices, particularly the price of Western Canadian Select, when the fire in Fort McMurray shut in 1 million barrels of production? The price went up. That fire was telling us we are overproducing this resource and oversupplying the market. And we are driving down prices. Okay. Here's another CEO saying, this is from Imperial Oil. Let's go on. Open up the Wall Street Journal, which is a publication I force myself to read on a regular basis, because I really need to know what the promoters of income inequality are up to. And, here, refining has now become a gold mine in North America. Capacity in almost all the refineries is at peak capacity. And the United States is now exporting refined oil and gas products to Canada. Look at that leap. Some of it is condensate, but a lot of it is refined gasoline and oil. Americans know how to add value. Okay. Now, here's another story before I close. This is an important story. It's a story that really you probably find a bit shocking. I find it a bit shocking. How many of you have heard about air barrels? Oh, there's a few people that have heard about air barrels. That's good. Okay, I'm going to explain to you a little more about what the hell an air barrel is and what is it doing in pipelines carrying Alberta diluted bitumen. Okay. So here's the main carrier for oil from Alberta. This is the Embridge main line, and it's designed with a capacity of 2.75 million barrels a day. But it is not running at capacity. You would think it was overbooked, overloaded, and is running. It is not. It is at least 125,000 barrels not at capacity. And why is that? Well, it has to do with air barrels. So, an air barrel is industry slang for nominations to fill in a pipeline above the shipper's ability to move oil. And I'll explain some more of this in a moment. All right, it is a way, and this is an analyst describing it is a way of gaming the system so companies can get as much crude as possible to refineries. So this is how it works. All right. Yeah, let's go on to the next one. So, Embridge calls for nominations. Suncor, Imperial say, I nominate 100,000. Cenovus says, I nominate 150,000, and blah, blah, blah. And so they do this every month. The nominations come in. And if Embridge thinks the capacity of the pipeline is going to be exceeded, then they go to a system called apportionment. So they say, okay, that's great. Thank you for your nomination. but we're going to have to subtract 10% from that in order to accommodate what everyone wants. So sometimes the apportionment will be 10%, and in the last couple of months, it's been up to 50% apportionment. So companies are only getting half of what they want on the line. So how do the companies respond to this system? They game it. They say, okay, I nominate not 125,000 barrels, I nominate 200,000 barrels, because you're calculating that with apportionment, you might, get 125, and that, okay. So, but you don't end up shipping that. So what Embridge finds at the end of each and every month, they're short 125,000 barrels, or every day, actually, of air going through their system where the pipeline is not being filled. Okay. So I've explained all this. Let's go on. This has been a problem on the main line for years. I mean, let's go on. The Koch brothers got really upset when the Kalamazoo spill happened because Embridge went to an apportionment system. And here this graph shows, what the nominations and stuff look like, and then the bottom line was actually what was being carried in the pipeline. So, I mean, a hell of a lot of air barrels. And then you have the Koch brothers making a complaint to the Federal Energy Commission of the United States. Let's go on. So Embridge has been aware of this problem for a long, long time. They actually tried to correct it earlier this year. I mean, there are lots of different ways you can correct it, so you've got full capacity. And the problem here is that if you don't at full capacity, you're really going to affect the pricing. So they said, we're going to change things here, guys. The Suncor and Imperial and Husky, the guys with the refineries, said, don't do this. We don't like what you're doing because we're making tons of money. So they had to reverse their position. Here you can see what happened to prices when they reversed their position. They went back up. And now there is an organization called, just remember their name, is the Crude Oil Logistics Committee, all right, composed of all the oil sands producers and stuff. And they're supposed to debate this whole issue of pipeline capacity, nominations, and how do you fill it, and how are we getting our good pricing and stuff. Let's go on. And look who sits on this committee. The Alberta government sits on this committee. The Alberta and the National Energy Board. And no one has done anything to correct this problem for more than 5 years. Okay. So here's Steve Lott from CNRL, really doing a good job of explaining how this whole thing works. Okay, then I'll read this. As I think we've talked before, actually in the first quarter, when differentials are very, very high, we actually had at times 50,000 to 125,000 barrels a day of space on the Embridge pipeline system that actually wasn't being utilized. Okay. That's a big problem. There's actually simple solutions to it. The fact that there's no discussion, public discussion in the Notley government about this problem tells you a lot. Nor was there any discussion in the previous Tory governments. All right. Here's another issue. It's going to be one roller coaster for the province. It is a nightmare story. So in this February, a guy from the Alberta Energy Regulator, which people quite correctly say really is the Alberta Non-Energy Regulator, made this presentation to the Petroleum Historical Society in Calgary. And this is what he said, and this was a barn burner of a disclosure. He said, you know what, the liabilities for unreclaimed pipelines, wells, facilities, oil sands, toxic pounds, and so on, is not 50 billion, as the regulator has claimed. It is probably much closer to 260 billion, and even that is a conservative estimate. This was not a hypothetical thing he was doing. He had actually approached people in industry to confirm a lot of these figures. He said, these are the unfunded liabilities that are going to be left for taxpayers if we don't do something about the system. So let's go on. So where are the liabilities? Well, there's about 130 billion in mining, and that's almost exclusively in the oil sands, a little bit in coal mining, not much. No, let's go back, let's keep there. The oil and gas and in situ, that's well reclamation, at least $100 billion. And then he talks about pipelines, and AER doesn't even have a system for assessing the liabilities of abandoned pipelines in the ground. And $30 billion. That's how he gets the $260 billion figure. Now, as soon as this story came out, the regulator disclaimed it and said, you know, this was a hypothetical thing, bit of an accident, don't worry about it, and we apologize for getting you excited. But what did he really say? What did the regulator actually say? He said, look, our liability funding is inadequate. We have no targets or thresholds for reclaiming abandoned facilities and wells. We don't. The funding is only collected from companies when they are near bankruptcy. The courts are very clear. When companies go bankrupt, the creditors get paid and the environmental mess is left for taxpayers. He called it a flawed system. We'll just skip that slide. That's exactly what it is. And he asked the question, why have we never corrected this flawed system? Why hasn't the Notley government corrected this flawed system instead of in the House agreeing with Jason Kenney that there's no problem? My God, here's another opportunity missed. So the tailings ponds, 24 billion at least. I mean, these are my own calculations in the past. Mine sites, 21 billion. And well sites, at least 50 to 60 billion. All right, so that brings us to the end here. We have many, many challenges facing this province. This province could still pull itself out of the quicksand it is in if it made an about face and finally embraced what Lougheed was talking about. It would have to be dramatic. It would have to be abrupt. It would have to take enormous guts and courage to do it. But you know, this is one platform that all 4 political tribes in Alberta could support. Slow down. Save the money. Collect your fair share. Behave like an owner. Add value. Clean up the mess. All right. By slowing down, I just don't mean that Alberta needs to slow down. The whole global economy needs to slow down if we want to take climate change seriously. And by saving the money, this is a good graph of where we would have been if we'd behaved like Norway. We would have a fund of 165 billion. We'd be laughing despite all of the price volatility. All right. Somehow, the government of this province does not understand the law of supply and demand. You oversupply a market, and you're going to get a crappy price for your resource. And that's why pushing for more pipelines, especially pipelines to export bitumen to Asia, is not a good idea for the province. You know, behave like an owner. If you're getting a really crappy price because, you know, the main shipper of your product can't get its act together about capacity and running the product in the pipeline properly, then you need to step up and do something about it. Okay. So fix this air barrel scam. Need to rethink this whole aspect of adding value. There are lots of different proposals on the table. There's partial upgrading. And the thing about partial upgrading is that it doesn't cost as much. It still adds a lot of value. And it is something the province could invest in. And it's also something the feds could invest in. If the feds wanted some money well spent, they would take their investment out of Kinder Morgan and put it here in partial upgrading. If you wanted a real bang for your buck, rather than sending a cheap refinery feedstock for China where we're going to get no price lift whatsoever. Okay. This is a job exporting project. You know, most of the labor unions in this province fought this project from the beginning because it will kill refining and upgrading jobs. We've got this problem with climate change, and it is going off the map. You know, carbon tax is one thing, but if you are not actually reducing production, you will not be reducing emissions. You need a 30-year plan to reduce oil sands production to at least 1 million barrels a day. The royalty issue. You've got 5 companies making record profits because they were smart enough to invest in refineries and upgraders. You need to tax those guys appropriately. And you need to capture some of that profit. You know, and then you need to save it. You cannot run on this resource revenue. All right? Okay. Here's your CNRL. I mean, on $1 billion worth of revenue, they are paying $6 million in royalties. If that sounds right to you, you know, all right. This production graph is going the wrong way. You know, the law of supply and demand is sending a big message to Alberta, wake up. Okay? There's this organization, Reclaim Alberta, which has a proposal to address the growing taxpayer liabilities on the landscape that will put Albertans back to work. But the only way you can fund this at this point in time, because most oil and gas companies are in debt up to their ears, particularly conventional ones, is by taxing the bitumen producers. And I think you also need a federal reclamation tax that should be added to gasoline. That should also support this effort because the liabilities are just massive. Okay, next. We all need to do this. Nobody ever wants to talk about this, but we all need to do this, to consume less. And my last thought. You know, Nicholas Taleb put it best. We become civilized only by knowing what to refrain from doing. Thank you.
I guess this is live. Yes, it is, apparently. So I'd still like us to be out of here by 1:30, but we will take a few questions here. So we have some runners, and those people who put up their hands, hand right back here in the orange, center sort of row here. And go right here afterwards. I'd ask you to keep your questions short to the point so we can get as many in as possible in the next few minutes here, and then back over here. Okay.
Excellent and passionate presentation. I just want to get to the issue of, I would say, the moral consequences of upgrading and processing. And I'm speaking as a study, or not as a study, but what happened in Michigan, where the crude or tar sands from Alberta has been processed. It's been processed in poor areas, and it's had devastating health effects. And the people cannot even sell their homes and move away. And if you look at even processing other types or lighter types of crude, even in Texas, there's similar issues. So why would we want to export our bitumen to Asia, where we would see poor people being devastated even more? So I think there's ethical and moral questions that have to be raised on the question of bitumen export.
I agree with you about bitumen export, but I still think you could do partial upgrading is a little bit different than the processing and refining you're talking about at the refineries in the United States. And you're right, most refineries are located in poor neighborhoods because the powers that be figure the poor will not be able to marshal the political resources they need to correct the abuse of power by these organizations, by these big companies. But I think for Alberta, and this has been an issue in Refinery Road, believe me, there are a lot of public health issues associated with all of this, and I'm not denying that. But I'm still saying for the future of this province, to totally ignore the idea of adding value. Okay, if you decide we're not going to add value, then God damn it, you better tax those companies that are adding value and making record profits. Okay.
Just down here. Yeah.
Mr. Andrew, excellent presentation. Who is listening to you? And based on your last statement, it sounds like the Alberta NDP is not listening to you as well.
I don't know who is listening to me. That's the question I've had for many years. Sometimes I think nobody is listening to me. I'll tell you a funny story. When I wrote my book, The Tar Sands, in 2008, which pretty much outlined this whole scenario that we are in, and where I strongly recommended that we cap production at 2.5 million, just because of the economics and the environmental cost and the issues of markets and so on. What was the response of the Alberta government? The response, and I learned this a couple years later afterwards, was that Tory MLAs went back to their ridings and told their constituents not to read the book. Kid you not.
Banned in Boston. It's a version of it, I guess. Yeah. The other hand was just over here in the plaid shirt. If someone can run over here.
Oh, sorry. I have a question because I understand Robin Allen.
Robin Allen, you talking about?
Has submitted a request to the NEB to calculate the toll fees that would be applied based on the 25% increase in project costs.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering if that would affect some of the air barrel issues.
Yeah.
And the other question really is just the federal government right now is planning on spending 15 to 20 billion of taxpayer money on this project in the next 2 years. And at the same time, how is that going to affect Canada's credit rating, our ability to respond to any sort of fiscal crisis that might come up? Any thoughts on that?
Okay. All right, so the first question is about the tolls that companies charge to run batches of petroleum through their pipelines. And these tolls are based on recovering costs of construction. So the Kinder Morgan pipeline was originally pegged that it's going to cost around $5 billion. Then the price went up to $7.3 billion, and now it's $9.3 billion. It will likely be somewhere between 12 and 15 billion for taxpayers, right? So if the costs of building that pipeline are going to go up that much, then the tolls will have to go up. And if the tolls go up, then who's going to make money shipping this stuff to Asia? And can the shippers afford these tolls? So that's and Robin Allen, who's a brilliant economist in BC, is asking that question. And she has not found the National Energy Board to be a terribly accountable organization or one that is fact-based. And so then we have this bigger issue of, is spending between, $10 billion or $20 billion of taxpayers' money on a pipeline that doesn't have a real economic argument other than a flawed report by the previous proponent of the pipeline, Kinder Morgan, is that a risk for taxpayers? That is a massive risk for taxpayers. Huge. But the government of Alberta and the government of the federal government have done a good job of fooling Canadians and to say, well, it's all about market access. If we don't have this access, we won't get a good product, a good product for a good price for our product. When in fact, none of these economic arguments, as I pointed out, are true. We talk about Donald Trump and lies. I mean, Canadians are being exposed to the same level of lying and deceit as Americans are on a daily basis.
And again, just this gentleman over here.
Thank you. Your presentation was absolutely an eye-opener. I liked a lot your approach because reality takes precedence over planning with respect to the issue of your computer. You did pretty good on that. I really don't know how to elaborate my question to you. I have worked in the oil industry. A refinery costs lots of money.
Yes.
It's very expensive. So even if you have a refinery, you still have to get the product somewhere.
Yep.
So we're going to end up drowning ourselves in our own oil. Is that true?
Okay. All right. So you're asking a really good question. All right. So one of the reasons we probably don't have the refineries that we should have in Alberta is the cost. At least that's the argument that the industry has made while they were investing in refinery upgrades in the United States. All right. They chose to invest elsewhere, not in this country, and for understandable reasons. I mean, why invest here when you're getting the resource practically for nothing? You're paying nothing for it, right? So you're going to move it somewhere where you can get the very best value for the resource. We do have a problem with overproduction. All right. I mean, this is why I think part of the solution here is some partial upgrading. So you have a resource that's somewhere in between light oil and heavy oil, and you can find more markets for that oil in American refineries probably. And it's a kind of a compromised position. It doesn't require as much investment, and you can have smaller facilities, and you wouldn't be doing a lot of this, but it would give the province some options, and there would also be added value in terms of jobs and better royalties for bitumen because we'd be getting a better price. But you're right, we have to address this issue of overproduction. This is a temporary issue that will probably last another 5 years as a result of the intense fracking going on in the United States. But that is a temporary boom, and that will slowly end. We know that heavy oil production in both Venezuela and Mexico is declining. So we know that in the long term, there will be fairly healthy demand for Canadian heavy oil, but not on the scale that we have planned. Not 5 million barrels a day, not if we want to get a good price for it, but more at around 3 million barrels a day with the idea we're going to slowly decrease that production. If we slowly decrease that production and ensure that we keep on maximizing the very best price we can get for the product by shutting in production, I know, a radical idea, OPEC does this all the time, but but just think about Alberta behaving like an owner. What happens to petro states when they forget to behave that way? Well, Venezuela, Mexico. Anyway, good point, and I hope I've answered your question. Yeah.
We have two more people identified here. It's 124, so I think we'll take those, and then afterwards, maybe you can speak with Andrew just afterwards. But just at the back here, and then over here.
Hi, my name is Sunny. I'm not a politician, or I'm not Trump, or I'm not Jason Kenney. This is my own opinion and my own philosopher. Everybody don't like talks when you hear that, like when we're gonna raise your tax for 3.5%. So everybody's complaining, right? Everybody don't like it. Now, if we're gonna tax our investor that they helping us to have economy in Alberta, what do you think they're gonna do? They're gonna run away. They say, no, we need the investor.
No, they are not going to run away because they've already made the investment. I mean, the investments in the oil sands have been made. These guys are here for the long term, all right? They've got 50-year strategies for producing heavy oil in this province, all right? And they are making a killing. And so they are not going to move. They are not going to leave. They're going to say, oh, this is unfortunate. Shareholders, instead of ordering a bottle of champagne this year, you will have to do with a $40 a bottle of wine. So, you know, it's not going to be a big deal for them. I mean, I'm not talking about, you know, taxing these guys out of existence or into oblivion. I'm saying just put a fair tax on the excess profits they're making, because they're selling cheap to themselves and selling to us high because they have the refineries and the upgraders. I'm saying it's our duty as owners of the resource to capture some of that value. Otherwise, this province is going to be in serious, serious trouble.
Last question over here. Again, apologies for anyone else has their hands up at this point, but yeah.
I have 3 points to make. One, I really appreciate the fact that the emperor has no clothes, as how you clearly show us. And those emperors are, to be clear, the 5 big oil.
Yeah.
We have to recognize that this particular government is as close as we've ever had to a Lougheed, where has been churning around these disasters. So it's kind of like, I guess I'm challenging you for the next 2 points. We got horses who are working very hard. We need to respectfully critique, but we need desperately to support and do all our best to get this government back in power. The second thing is, I would like to challenge you to change the language a bit. I'm a citizen, not a taxpayer. My primary thing is to be living on this earth, and secondly, I'm an earthling. So ecology trumps economy all the time. And as we heard from our Indigenous friends, we have to change our own language to talk about how we deal with living on this land, with fresh, clean water, land that we can live on, and also recognize that we have a citizen responsibility to share the load together as well as reap the benefits.
Okay. In response to one of your first points about supporting the government, that's not my job as a journalist. My job is to inform inform citizens so they get engaged and change their governments. So your point about taxpayers, that I mean, I use the term taxpayers more in Alberta than I do in other places, just because I understand this to be a fiscally conservative place. And I'm trying to rattle people here because the current government's record, let's say on fracking, on water conservation, is not good. This is not a government that has turned around any of those major land issues for landowners in this province, that's for damn sure. It's got a long ways to go. But yes, I mean, I myself think of myself as a citizen first and as a taxpayer second. So.
Andrew, I want to first apologize to you for the sabotage the UCP did, but I'm glad you got around that. I want to thank everybody who came to this conference and finishing a big round of applause for Andrew for a fabulous talk. Thanks so much. Thanks so much. As a very small token of appreciation, a gift for you, Andrew. Thank you for coming. I know we'll have you back again.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.